So we're continuing in our sermon series this morning. Who are you in the crowd? Who are we in the crowd? Because as Jesus went around doing the things he did, saying the things he did, a crowd was always there. And today this is an opportunity to, when we read the Bible, bring our own imaginations, bring our own experiences, everything that we are and everything that we're going through. Positive, negative, whatever it is. We get to test how each character relates to us or doesn't relate to us. It's like when you read a book. I nearly do this the wrong way around, read a movie and watch a book. But read a book or watch a movie. You get this description, this really long and clear description of things like their face, their characteristics, why they do the things they do, their intentions as they act. You get all this detail, but the thing is, in the Bible, we don't know what people look like. We don't get a full description of why they do the things they do. We rarely get an insight into their intentions, their inner thoughts, what they think of a situation. And that means for these biblical stories in particular, we get an opportunity in a powerful way to bring the Bible to life using our imagination, using our own thoughts, our own needs to explore those silent parts, because we don't get the same detail. We have to use our imaginations. So let's bring this morning everything we have, our worries, our flaws, our biases, our joys, our characters, our experiences, as we read the text this morning. And honestly, it was a revelation when I started doing this. And actually, I worked out this morning, it was actually with the passage we were looking at, when I really started just asking myself, which character am I in the crowd? Or what do I relate to? What don't I relate to? Just be part of the story. And honestly, that started impacting me more than all these clever theological things and comments. I would study theology at university, and that really impacted me more than all of those clever theological, deep, thoughtful stuff. Because entering the story changes the way we see the world. This is why television and media, they're so powerful, and it's why this morning testimonies, sharing these stories, they're so powerful. They change the way we see the world. So our reading today is from Luke chapter 8. To give you a context, the disciples have been getting a bigger picture of who Jesus is in this chapter. He's been telling them parables. He has been distancing himself from his family by emphasizing first that everyone who follows God is his family. So Jesus has been a bit, for want of a better word, otherly, different. And then Jesus was sleeping on a boat as a storm was tumulting around him and around the disciples, a bit like Jonah, and they were despairing. But Jesus calmly says, "It's fine, you're not going to drown." And he tells the storm to be quiet, and it is quiet. So Jesus has this bizarre, strange, fearsome authority. And indeed, that shows in the next story, because a legion of demons, aptly called Legion, runs away at the sound of his voice. So Jesus, as we come to today's passage, he's different, he's a bit strange, but he is special, and he is approachable. So as we get to today's passage, the disciples are no doubt riding on this high of being with Jesus. They're a bit anxious probably about what might happen this time. And the crowds gathering around have their own story, but they must be excited, enthusiastic, pressing against him as they claw for a little bit more understanding of who he is and what it means for them. Because this morning they have a desire for healing, each to their own, each in a different way, but they have their desire for everything that Jesus has for them. As we read the passage together this morning, we're going to take our time. We're going to see, as we enter the story, how it changes us, how it impacts us, what we think of it. And I just want to ask us all to ask ourselves, who are we in this crowd today? So, If we can have the Bible passage up, please. We're reading from Luke chapter 8, verse 40. I'm using the NRSV version. Now, when Jesus returned, the crowd welcomed him, for they were all waiting for him. Just then, there came a man called Jairus, a leader of the synagogue, and he fell at Jesus' feet and begged him to come to his house, for he had an only daughter, about 12 years old, who was dying. And so we meet our first character in the story. Jairus is the leader of a synagogue. That means he's an important person. The only word we get in Greek is archon, which just means chief. It means leader. It's a sort of general description. But whatever it exactly means he was, it means he was an important member of the community. He had power, probably a bit of wealth. He had religious knowledge, kind of everything you might want in a Jewish society. But in this moment of crisis, he'd lost all control. His daughter was dying. That's intense. He's clearly passionate. And he falls at Jesus' feet. He doesn't just go up to Jesus. Everything overwhelms him. He falls at Jesus' feet. An authoritative man crumbling down in hope. Perhaps this morning, we too are feeling that kind of thing, whether about ourselves or like Jairus. This is about someone else. That's a really difficult place to be in. So out of control, because it's not even about ourselves, it's about someone else, where that love bubbles up inside of us. But we are so uncertain of what's going to come next. But Jairus falls at Jesus' feet, and that's good. It's good to have those feelings, as horrible as they are, as out of control as we are. That love is powerful. So we continue. As Jesus went, the crowds... I think I've missed a bit. Never mind. As Jesus went, the crowds pressed in on him. And now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. And though she had spent all she had, everything she had, on physicians, no one could cure her. So she came up behind him and touched the fringe of his clothes, and immediately her hemorrhage stopped. And so we have our second character. A woman that has been downtrodden, suffering for goodness knows how many years. We're not told exactly, but it's a long time. This is not a short-term problem. This is something she's been having to live with for a very long time. This has affected her from the ground up. It's impacted her every day, her every thought, her every experience. It's financially impacted her. Whether she started off wealthy or started off poor, she spent everything that she has on trying to be well. Every part of her, no doubt, is drained. Maybe she was desperate. Maybe because of the experiences she had and the illnesses she had, she could have even been ostracized by the community. Maybe. Maybe not. And so as she comes today, she's on the edge of tears. At least this is how I'm picturing it. On the edge of tears because her hope has been revived just that little bit. Enough for this once, after all these years of disappointment and agony, to go towards Jesus, to push her way through the crowd. Because the crowds are pressing in against him, and yet she manages just about to find enough energy, enough hope, to draw close enough to Jesus to touch his cloak. And that's all it took. That's all it took. In all that vulnerability, all those years of pain, that one moment, and she touched Jesus' cloak. Let's continue the story. We're going to see what happens in a moment with her. But first, Jesus asked in that moment, "Who touched me?" And when everyone denied it, Peter said, "Master, the crowds surround you and press in on you." But Jesus said, "Someone touched me, for I noticed that the power has come out from me, has gone out from me. And so the third character here, I think, just quickly, is Peter. Because he's on the outside of the situation today a little bit. He's kind of fulfilling that practical role as a disciple. He's with Jesus. He's perhaps protecting Jesus or pushing the crowds back a little bit. He's there in stewarding role, his role as part of the entourage. But today he's a little bit less astute. He's not quite noticed what's going on. He's not as in need of healing as everyone else is, and he's less aware of the needs of others. He's practical. He's just getting on with it. He doesn't notice. Perhaps we feel a little bit like that ourselves this morning. Perhaps because we don't obviously think there's anything particularly we need healing for. Perhaps we're just facilitating others in some form, whether in our private lives or here in the church. What might Jesus say to us today? Because that's a place that's really important. Really, really important. But Jesus still wants to speak to us. There's still something to learn. More on that later. And so we continue. When the woman saw that she could not remain hidden, after all, everyone else is saying it's not them, she came up to Jesus, trembling and falling down before him, just like Jairus, but in a different way. She declared in the presence of all the people why she had touched him and how she had been immediately healed. And he said to her, Jesus stopped and said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." And so we're back to the woman. Even though she's been healed, right? So we think that the story's kind of complete there in a way, don't we? Because she's got a physical problem, and she touched Jesus, and she was made well. It's sorted. And yet, when we see her again now, she's reluctant. She's afraid. She isn't overjoyed, or at least not obviously, because she's not shouting it out in front of everyone. As soon as Jesus asks, she's not volunteering herself at the front saying, "It was me. Look at me. Look what's happened to me. Thank you, Jesus." No. She's uncertain, she's depressed, and she's still vulnerable. Why might that be? Sometimes even the most obvious thing that we get healed with doesn't stop those years of vulnerability, those years of maybe depression, of hopelessness, all the problems, doesn't put them away at once. There's still things she needs to learn and move through. But Jesus is there. He recognizes that. It's not the end of the story, because he says to her, "Your faith," first of all, he says, "Daughter." He calls her by that familial, loving word. "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." We continue the story. While he was still speaking, somebody came from the leader's house, Jairus' house, to say, "Your daughter is dead." Don't trouble the leader anymore, the teacher anymore. But when Jesus heard this, he replied, "Don't fear. Only believe, and she will be saved." And so we have another character, the messenger, just quickly. He's a bit dismissive right now, but I don't think it's because he doesn't care. It's just, it's done. While Jairus has been out, the daughter's died. And that's that. Sometimes when we're suffering, we often do this kind of thing, say, "Well, it's over now. It is what it is. Stop bothering other people. We don't want to bother them. They aren't going to care like I do, or maybe I should just get on with it myself. It's my hurt. I should sort it out. I can bear it." But again, Jesus doesn't stop there. He says to Jairus, and he probably to the messenger as well, "Don't be afraid. Because if you believe, if you trust," is the better translation there, pistu. It's the same word for believe and faith. it means trust, ultimately. If you trust, she will be saved. And again, notice that, not just healed, but saved. That's a more well-rounded, we think of it in quite a technical sense with salvation, but it's a more well-rounded sense of being brought to a safe, full place, saved, delivered. And so we continue. When he came to the house of Jairus, he did not allow anyone to enter with him except Peter, John, and James, and the child's father and mother. And they were all weeping and wailing for her. But he said, "Do not weep, for she is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him, knowing that she was dead. But he took her by the hand and called out, "Child, get up." Her spirit returned. She got up at once, and then he directed them to give her something to eat. And so we have our final two characters. We have the crowd around, wailing, weeping, mourning, and we have the child. Do we think negatively for the crowd for laughing at Jesus when he says that she's only sleeping? And they probably just think he's not very competent. You know, they're mourning. This has hurt them. She's dead. And when Jesus says something wacky, they laugh. I mean, have you ever been in a difficult situation and all you can manage is a kind of laugh at it? Because it's painful, but it's too much. And then the child. She doesn't get many words. Well, she doesn't get any words. She's been unwell. She's then died. But then when Jesus calls her, patiently, steadfastly, and with the child's innocence, she gets up and she has something to eat. There's so many characters here this morning in our story. So many aspects and angles and things that happen. Whether we're going through different things today, or whether this is more about things we have been through in the past, or just engaging imaginatively with a story to prepare ourselves for things in the future. There is something here for each of us. And to be honest with you, I wasn't really sure how to take the sermon today, because it's not just healing we're talking about, it's the desire for healing. But here's my observation with the characters in our story today. It's not about having desire or not having desire. It's not like some people in the story here don't have a desire. Peter, on the outside, it's not like he wouldn't have a desire for healing, but he's just not particularly aware or self-aware even. And so it's easy to think that this sermon or this topic or prayer ministry or whatever doesn't apply to me. Maybe I'm in a really good place. There could be a very good reason for that. But here's the thing. We all want to be well, don't we? We all want to be well. We all want to be more well. And each of us is going to be at that different emotional and physical stage of our journey. And so, like each of the characters that we've made a little bit more three-dimensional this morning, they each need some kind of healing. Something major maybe, like the girl, or just the gentle, kind presence of Jesus, the joyful steps to make every day a more complete version of ourselves. And healing really is just like that. It's just that want, that desire for being more whole, a stronger sense of well-being. And so as we've each been part of the story today, let's fan those flames of desire in our own hearts as we look at ourselves and those around us. And I believe that since we've entered the story, these positive changes have already begun.